Recently, I've been seeing more and more comments about how Valve needs to buff things rather than nerfing others. And I started asking myself more about the question. To be completely transparent, I've usually been more of a fan of, nerfing the things that are OP rather than buffing everything else to the same level. But I started asking myself, what if I'm wrong in that general belief? And I'm a big fan of, challenging others' perspectives and challenging my own perspective over and over, right? And so I started kind of looking at other people's opinions, speaking to people. Hell, I even had a conversation about balance with Metro on his stream yesterday. People have been giving feedback directly to the developers since May. We've known this for, since May 2024, right? Some people have influenced the feedback more. Some people have less influence on the feedback. Patch by patch, the developers basically, they take what they like and they ignore what they don't like. That's it. And so, I'd like to think that I've explored a fair amount of different perspectives, and I've been able to form my own opinion a little bit better on some of these topics, and that's what I'd like to explore with you guys today. Is Deadlock's balance bad? That's kind of the question that I aim to answer. So, the first thing that I'd like to talk about is the concept of relative strength, right? Because it's very difficult to measure the strength and therefore the balance of a hero in a vacuum. So obviously, there's kind of two ways to measure relative strength, in my opinion. And this whole video is just my opinion and my understanding of these concepts. So I might be wrong on some of these, and please let me know if I am. The first way of measuring kind of relative strength, in my opinion, is comparing a hero's strength to another. Now, of course, this is a little bit harder because, not every hero in Deadlock has a role that's clearly set out. For example, we're watching Warden right now, right? Warden, I would say traditionally, is more of like a quote-unquote carry hero, but Warden can also be played as a bit more of a frontline hero with the ultimate build, right? He can be played as a gun DPS hero with the gun build, and so it's like, how do you compare Warden's strength compared to other heroes, right? Do you compare him to other heroes that can also kind of frontline? You compare him strictly to, gun heroes that can output a lot of DPS. But regardless, that is the first way we have of comparing heroes is, for example, here we have a Warden 1v1ing 7. Is the Warden stronger than the 7 in the 1 versus 1 as far as damage output, right? And then we have to consider their ultimates, consider their stats, consider their laning stage, so on and so forth. The second way of comparing hero strength is their strength relative to things in the game that don't really change. Things in the game that are objective, literally the objectives, right? So the neutral camps, the walkers, the guardians, all of that stuff, right? How strong is Warden? Like, how easily can Warden clear a camp? How easily can you push an objective? And obviously certain heroes, for example, let's take McGinnis, right? We're seeing McGinnis kill a walker right now. McGinnis is quite good at clearing objectives, generally speaking, right? We're going to see her here just go in, and this match is live, so it's kind of funny that all these examples are happening right before me, but she's going to take down the walker, and she's obviously going to be better at doing that than certain other heroes. So that's another facet of kind of like evaluating hero strength, is how good are they at doing these things, right? Like clearing these objectives, clearing the neutral camps, and that can definitely, play a factor. Heroes in a MOBA are complex, so there's a bunch of other things that enter the equation, such as, hey, how much CC does your hero's kit have, right? So, like, does your hero have a bunch of stuns? Does your hero have some silences? Does he have attack speed slows? Does he have movement slows, right? A lot of these other things. So, for example, if we take Lash, right? Lash has a potential knock-up on his ground strike, and he also has fire rate slow on his Flog when he goes to the max level. Right, so these are other factors to consider when you're comparing a hero's relative strength. And these factors are quite hard to take in a vacuum because some of these things are more important than others, especially in public play when you're just playing, matchmaking and you're not playing with a full stack, you're not playing in a tournament, right? And so there's kind of like a bunch of different worlds of Deadlock, right? The game is not the same in Oracle as it is in Eternus. The game is not even the same in Eternus in North America as it is in Europe, as it is in, OCE. Like, per region, there's quite a lot of variety within the own gameplay, and then you look at tournaments, and then the game's completely different in tournaments as well. Now that we've talked about relative strength, that's kind of the main way that you think a hero or an item is OP, right? Is how strong are they relative to the other options for their specific roles. For example, let's take a hero like, Shiv, right? Shiv is like a frontline type carry, right? Who can get in there, and he can not only frontline, but he can also output a ton of damage. Now, what other heroes can fulfill the same role? Part of the difficulty right now is that there's only 26 heroes in the game, and there's not really any hero that fulfills a similar role to Shiv, or like at least, there are some, right? But they're quite rare. For example, you could compare Shiv a little bit to Warden, but then Warden doesn't have an execute. Warden can get in there, he can do some damage with his ultimate, etc., but he doesn't have an execute that allows him to be a strong option against tanky targets, right? Shiv is inherently a counter to tanky heroes, and in the game there are very few counters to tanky heroes, right? So He's very strong in that aspect. Shiv as a tank itself, you could compare him to like Abrams, right? Is Shiv tankier than Abrams? A lot of people would say maybe, maybe not. But that's kind of like the problem with Shiv is compared to a lot of the other options, in almost every category that you would consider Shiv useful in, he's going to be stronger than the alternatives, right? And that's why a lot of people think Shiv is OP right now. You know, regardless of Shiv's win rate not actually being that high, it's just that he accomplishes these roles very, very well. So what are your options with a hero like Shiv, right? You always have two options when it comes to balance. And which one should you choose? And this is kind of going to be a little bit of the topic of the conversation is, should you nerf Shiv or should you buff everybody else, right? When you have something that's considered OP, you have the option of bringing everything else to that level of OPness, that level of strength, or you have the option of nerfing that specific thing that's OP. Personally, I've always thought that nerfing that specific thing that's OP was a better approach. And the reason for that is simple, is that you don't have to make as many changes, right? If you had to get everybody to the level of, say, Shiv or 7 right now, you'd have to buff a lot of heroes, right? Like most heroes in the roster would need buffs. It would be the majority of them that would need buffs, right? If you have to nerf the heroes that are clearly above the rest of the pack, you know, being Shiv, being 7, let's say Vindicta, in my opinion, Abrams, right? Not everybody agrees, but everybody agrees with Mirage, for example, being above the pack. If you have to get everybody to that level, then it's an insane amount of buffs. But if you have to nerf those heroes, it's not as many nerfs, right? And now I think the complaint that a lot of people have with that approach is kind of like, hey, well, you know, I think that we need heroes to be fun to play, right? And I think nerfing a bunch of heroes makes them less fun to play. And I think that that whole kind of concept is a little bit flawed, right? Because what makes a hero fun to play? What makes a hero fun to play is how satisfying their abilities are to use, right? How many different options you feel, like how you feel that your hero can be piloted through the game, how satisfying your abilities are, right? How fun the gameplay loop of that hero is. And now, none of these things are necessarily affected by a nerf, especially if the nerf is just numbers. That shouldn't really affect how satisfying an ability is. It should just affect how strong it is, right? And if at the end of the day, it's still strong relative to other abilities, it shouldn't matter, right? For example, let's say that you lower all the heroes' damage and HP by half or something, or like you nerf every single hero just has half damage, right? That wouldn't necessarily make one specific hero less fun. And I think that that's a concept that a lot of people forget about, right? Is that nerfs don't inherently make a hero less fun. Obviously, people like winning, and nerfing a hero makes their win rate go down, which means people tend to have less fun. That part is true. But I think a lot of people confuse the fun of the hero with the overall win rate. Of course, playing a hero that has a 55% win rate or 58% win rate, or just like a super bloated kit, is going to feel more fun than playing a hero that is in the dumps with like a 45% win rate. And just like, you know, I'm still talking about win rates a lot. Win rates aren't the only factor, and you can't balance by win rates. But, you know, it's just like a reference point, right? So, of course, playing a hero that's more powerful is going to be more fun, but at the end of the day, I don't think nerfing heroes inherently makes them less fun, depending on how they are nerfed. Now, I'll talk about specific types of nerfs that I think would make the game less fun, right? For example, let's talk about this item, Fortitude, right? This item has been problematic for a long time, ever since the item rework, and even before the item rework, it was bought every single game. This item has been like an item that almost everyone buys for the past probably 8 months, maybe even more. And, you know, the reason for that is quite simple. At the end of the day, there are no other items like Fortitude that allow you to regen your health and stay active on the map, right? And that's ignoring the fact that it gives you a ton of flat health. It also just gives you a lot of health. If you are to nerf Fortitude, and let's say you just removed the healing component from Fortitude altogether, I believe that that would make the game less fun. And the reason why that would make the game less fun is not because Fortitude as an item is weaker, but it's because you would have to go back to base more, right? That would be the result, is you'd have to go back to base more often, meaning you'd be less active on the map, meaning the game would be less fun. So if you nerf Fortitude that way, you need to find a way to kind of like alleviate the issue of making the game less fun. And while I was talking to Metro yesterday, you know, one of the ideas that I brought up was like, hey, what if you have little health packs or things that you can pick up that are like mini buffs around the map that heal you a little bit? Not necessarily like shrines, but stuff that allows you to stay a little bit active, right? While you're doing boxes, every once in a while, a box has a chance to drop perhaps a little bit of health. Now, maybe that's not a good idea, but if you don't do that, then you have to maybe make out of combat regen better. That's another alternative. But essentially, or you could nerf Fortitude by, hey, let's nerf the amount of health that it gives you, so the overall item strength goes down, but what makes the item fun, which is the ability to stay active on the map, is not affected, right? And that's a very important concept to understand, is you can nerf things without removing what makes them fun. That's my point. Now, to talk about the buff versus nerf concept a little bit, let's say that you do buff every hero to get to the point of like 7 or Shiv or etc., which is some people in my comments were saying that last video, right? If you do that, what's going to be the impact on the game? So let's say that you buff every damage dealer hero. So you buff, I don't know, Infernus, Wraith, Haze, etc., to be at the level of 7 where they can just deal like an unbelievable amount of damage, right? If you all buff them to be a similar level of strength to 7, what's going to happen inherently is the time to kill will go down, right? So everybody will die faster in the game. That's just what's going to happen, you know? You buff everyone is going to die faster, right? Which will then result in, like, people will be like, okay, well, people are dying too quickly now. Perhaps we need to buff green items and make people tankier, right? And then people are going to be tankier and now are going to be like, okay, well, I can't kill anyone and now tanks are too strong. And you can go in this kind of infinite loop with buffs, right? Where you buff one thing and then you buff another and then you buff another. And I think it's quite dangerous to kind of do that. So in an ideal world, in my opinion, when you do buffs and nerfs, you have to be cognizant of the, you know, the game mechanics that are behind those buffs and nerfs in order to not affect the overall gameplay loop of the game too much, right? And Valve, with the item rework, clearly wanted the time to kill in general to be higher. They wanted people to not die as fast. As far as the reason why they wanted people to not die as fast, I mean, your guess is as good as mine, but they made everybody have more health and they made everybody do less damage, essentially. Like, that was, you know, the main changes, right? Every item was kind of weaker in stats. Every hero did less damage, and they've nerfed the base damage once again, right? And so a lot of heroes just kind of do less damage than they did 6 months ago, which in my opinion was overall a good change. I don't think that these heroes are less fun because they do less damage. In fact, I quite enjoy the longer time of engages, right? I enjoy the fact that you don't get one shot as much as you did, you know, back in January, for example. Now, another complaint that I hear very often is meta versus non-meta. So a lot of people will tell me like, hey, there's only one way to play this specific hero, right? There's only one way to play, let's take a hero that's not OP, because usually the OP heroes have multiple ways to be played, right? But let's take a hero like, I don't know, McGinnis. I mean, McGinnis is quite strong right now, but historically, or like Ivy, people might be like, hey, right now there's only one way to make Ivy useful, which is the Spirit build, right? Famously, Wander, one of the top Ivy players in the game and in North America, has stopped playing Gun Ivy because he says that it's nerfed a little bit too bad, right? Part of that complaint about meta versus non-meta is, at the end of the day, there's always going to be builds that are better than others. And I firmly believe that a lot of builds are actually completely viable, especially for the large majority of players, right? I don't think every build needs to be insanely strong. On every hero, there's always going to be a build that's better than the others. That's just objectively true. It's going to be insanely difficult to balance 150 items, as well as balancing the heroes to the point where every hero has multiple build options, right? That's just going to be insanely difficult. So every hero is going to have options to them that are stronger than others. I think part of the complaint of meta versus non-meta is the fact that people don't think outside the box enough, right? Part of the beauty of the item rework is the fact that if you want to build a full Spirit Abrams, for example, you can. If you want to build a full Green Abrams, you can. If you want to build a full Gun Abrams, you can. Now, of course, all of these are not going to be as strong as the other. There's always going to be items that suit Abrams' playstyle better, right? But it is a bit of an interesting complaint to me, because obviously this game is quite unique. But when you look at other MOBAs, there's almost always like the one build that is way meta on every hero. And I feel like it's just, you know, just a designing a competitive game. People are going to want to do the thing that's the most optimal. But I think in general with Deadlock, people should be less afraid to experiment and, you know, just go outside the box a little bit more. And I think people, especially like the average player, maybe you're around Archon or Emissary or whatever, would find that there's actually a lot of ways to make heroes work, especially your rank, you know? Now, I do believe that Valve does need to do a slightly better job of making multiple builds viable if they can on certain heroes. But I don't think it's as bad as people say it generally. And I think that when I challenge people on that point, and I'm like, okay, you know, what builds do you think, or what hero do you think has no viable builds? And then I look at the hero and I suggest other builds, people tend to realize, yeah, okay, that build is like playable, but it's not that great. But, you know, isn't that fine? If the build is like playable, but it's not amazing, isn't that good enough? I guess that we should ask more out of Valve, but I think that's a good start at least. I want to kind of like touch on a last point as far as balance goes, which is, why are people so unhappy about the state of balance, right? I made my meta report video And that was the time in my comments. So I think people still liked the video. My like to dislike ratio was about the same. But in the comments, I've never seen so many comments be negative about Deadlock, right? And even some people would go as far as like to blame me for the current state of the balance of Deadlock, which if you'd rather blame me than like the, you know, giant corporation that is actually balancing the game, that's fine by me. That's not a problem. But I do want to talk a little bit about why I think people are so upset about the state of the balance. And I think that really the main factor is a few things, but I think the main thing is that the offenders are always the same. What I mean by that is that the people that are at the top right now, like Mirage, for example, or like Shiv as another example, or, you know, Seven, right, are heroes that have been really strong for a really long time, right? And the reason why they're so strong is because Valve is nerfing a lot of things, which makes the heroes that have inherently broken things in their kit kind of like stay at the top always, right? And it's just very, very difficult to balance in that sense, because Valve has not really done a huge balance patch, I would say, maybe in the history of Deadlock, right? They've changed a lot of numbers, they've changed a lot of things, but if you look, what I'm talking about is like a Dota style patch, right? Where there's a patch, it's like, okay, we're moving on to version 7.33. Here are the new mechanics. Here are some general balance changes, you know? For example, like the introduction of universal heroes in Dota, like that's a huge balance patch to the game's fundamental mechanics, right? We haven't really had that. You could argue that the item rework was kind of that, right? Because the item rework had a lot of like implications on a lot of people, a lot of heroes, and a lot of mechanics. So you could argue that that was it. But other than that, I don't think we've had a huge balance patch. And I think Valve is in maintenance mode right now. I think that they're just doing hotfixes to kind of try to keep the community at least like somewhat okay with the current state of the game while they're working on the big patches. Is that the right thing to do? It's really hard to say, because obviously I'm frustrated too. And I think that's really important for people to know. I'm not happy about the current state of the balance of the game, right? I'm a little bit upset about it. Some games feel kind of the same. It doesn't feel like there's been a shakeup. But it is important that we do remember, and I don't want to use this as an excuse, but it is a playtest, and Valve is just focusing on what moves the game forward, whether we agree or disagree with it. How hard would it be for them to balance the game better? Honestly, probably not that hard. So we shouldn't give them a free pass either, right? There are things that are pretty obviously broken, for example, about Shiv's kit, that definitely need to be looked at. And I feel like it's going to bite them in the ass if they keep delaying it over and over. But I think for now, we should use a little bit of patience, and there's nothing we can do about the current state of the balance, right? Valve is going to do what they want to do, and we just kind of have to, you know, move on. If you're not happy about it, I would say take a break, and that's totally fine. I understand a lot of people don't want to take a break because this game is incredible and has so much potential. But if you need to, take a break. That's my final message, essentially, to everybody. So I hope you guys enjoyed this kind of more informal discussion about the current state of the balance, as well as some points. And let me know what you guys think in the comments, because I'm truly interested in what you guys think about some of the things that I said about buffs versus nerfs and the overall relative strength of heroes, etc., etc. Because I'm not sure that what I'm saying is objectively true. I haven't really had anybody else review the script. I haven't spoken about the script to any other top players, so I could be completely on an island here. And let me know if I am. Regardless, thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.